Good evening and welcome to another edition of Live with Dr. Wendy. I am joined, as I always am, with my trusty co-host, Larry Dersham, an estate planning and constitutional lawyer, and a great sounding board for some of the exciting issues that we talk about each week. But first, the headlines of the evening are still the raging fires. We have just lived through a week, visually at least on the West Coast, of looking outside and thinking we are on Mars. And that has reflected the air quality level. And it is absolutely amazing that we look outside every day and see joggers and bikers and hikers. It is very important to install one of those apps, whether you like a WeatherBug or whether you have the iPhone, which actually tells you the air quality, whatever city you're in or whatever city you would like to go for a hike. And it gives you what to look at in order to determine whether or not that's the best idea. Now, I know what you're thinking. First, they tell us we can't be inside, we have to be outside because of COVID concerns. Now they tell us we have to be inside, not outside because of the air quality. First, we have rolling blackouts and we have to open our windows because their air conditioning is off. Now they're telling us we have to keep basically our windows shut because the air quality is so bad. Well, thank God we didn't at least suffer rolling blackouts and low air quality at the same time. So I suppose that is the silver lining, because we're all about the silver lining here at Live on Dr. Wendy. But let me also give you another silver lining. Our governor happened, and this is just a coincidence, to, in a stroke of luck, open the doors of many of the restaurants allowing for indoor dining just in time, because remember what was happening? We were sitting out on the patio where fire fallout was turning our orders of scrambled eggs into ash browns. We were sitting there eating with ash falling into our food. It was no fun. And just in time, the governor has allowed some of us to go back inside and actually enjoy our meal in the restaurants. So one of the things we've also been thinking about this week as we've been following the fires is how in the world do these things start? Now, I understand that there will always be things like acts of nature and downed power lines because a tree falls. But part of what we're also learning is some of these have been intentional. Now, regardless of how they start, one of the things that we want to make sure that is on our punch list for next year is a battery-operated indoor fan. Now, what is the beauty of having a battery-operated indoor fan? Well, if you have rolling blackouts due to the heat, that thing will still run. And if at the same time, as we did last week, you also have raging wildfires that make your sky look like something from an end of the world disaster film, and you can't open the windows because of the low air quality, you can still enjoy that battery operated fan. So I hate to almost say that because they're probably going to fly off the shelves, but probably something everybody thought about to begin with anyway. So back to how do these fires start? Well, one of the fires that have caused the most damage, that would be the El Dorado fire that everybody's talking about. And that was actually caused by what's been described as a pyrotechnic device. Now already, I mean, just the sound of that, you're thinking, what in the world was that? That sounds like a fire starting device. Well, actually, it's not very uncommon. It was used during a gender reveal party. And the other half of you were saying, okay, now what's that? This is simply an Instagram-friendly event. It's held often during a pregnancy where the parents reveal the baby's sex to friends and family. That reveal can sometimes take the form of an explosion of color, hence the word explosion. That's where the emphasis belongs. Blue for a boy, pink for a girl. The poor family in this case, they did not intend to start a forest fire. They just wanted to celebrate something with their friends and family, and you could see them scrambling afterwards, grabbing water bottles, trying to put it out. This is not the way they wanted to remember that gender reveal. But actually, it's not that uncommon for gender reveal pyrotechnic devices to spark large-scale fires, and that is actually what happened in this case. There's plenty, if I'm sure they're feeling horrible, but they are in good company. This has happened different places all across the nation. It might not happen as often as it does now, given the press that this particular fire is receiving. But is it always about accidents, or is it also about arsonists?
Right, Wendy, well, did we mention transmission lines?
Yes, I mentioned the tree falling and the transmission line gets knocked down. Freaky events of nature, lightning striking, but sometimes it is all about the arson, isn't it?
It is, and sometimes, I mean, it gets really bad when you have the Santa Ana winds where they blow from east to west, and it just really picks up and blows that like a torch, those fires. But just for our listeners to know, and they may already pick this up in the news, that there have been several Antifa activists that have been arrested. Now, we do believe as attorneys, you're innocent until proven guilty. So I'm not going to mention any names, although I have some. But there's active criminal investigations going on right now regarding that. And another interesting thing, I just picked this up today on the internet. I think a lot of this has to do with forest management, possibly some of the environmental concerns where they're not allowed to remove dead trees and brush. And I understand in some places, Wendy, the dead foliage and trees and so forth is 10 feet high. You can't even get through it. And one interesting thing, there was a tweet by a Hollywood gentleman by the name of James Woods, and he said, "Hey, Governor Newsom, why does climate change stop abruptly at the Canadian border?" Literally a map of the United States and Canada, and there may be one or two fires up there, and they have tons of forests. But the whole West is aflame, and that is curious. Why is it the United States and not Canada?
Yeah, no, those are really good points. And it also, I should have said, you talk about a perfect storm, the perfect firestorm, I suppose. So we had the heat, we had the fires, and this is all coinciding with going back to school. So I want to segue just briefly from gender reveal to lesson reveal. We have been hearing a lot about schools that have, at least to some extent, attempted to, and I hate to say it this way, but keep a secret as to what the kids are learning. That's clearly can't possibly be the intent of the schools. Can it?
Well, actually it can. And this is out of Tennessee. Officials in Tennessee's Rutherford County School District sent a letter to parents asking them to sign a waiver promising not to eavesdrop during the online lessons.
And Larry, I'm gonna let you continue with the story, but let me just ask you one question here at the beginning, because you and I have been following the story for weeks. Eavesdropping on your child, isn't that called parenting? Don't you supervise what your children are doing? And when you answer that in connection with the story, it would also be interesting to share with our listeners, what are the ages of these kids? Are we talking 5-year-olds or 17-year-olds? Or all of the above, maybe?
Basically, as far as I understand, Wendy, all of the above. Mm-hmm. And there's a woman back there in Tennessee. Her name is Lori Cardoza Moore. She's founder of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. And she said, this is so hypocritical what they're doing because they've been data mining our children for years. Complements of Common Core, the national education standards. And it makes one wonder, what are they trying to hide? Well, some people argue that they're teaching our children propaganda. They're trying to socialize our children. And finally, back in Tennessee, the district officials relented. They said, okay, after a fierce public backlash, they said, okay, you can watch the lessons, parents, but you're not allowed to record it. I don't know, it's just so interesting. And
I'll give the counter argument just so our listeners have something to put it in perspective. That's the beauty of Larry and I being lawyers, is we can argue both sides of all of this. So the school was basically, I don't want to say they fought back. They were actually very nice about it. They tried to explain their position as follows. They explained it was not about propaganda, but about privacy. And they shared with the parents that there are many students that are uncomfortable being on camera, and they're uncomfortable being seen and heard and listened to by other parents. They likened it to a parent wanting to sit in the back of the classroom to see what their kids are learning, which they said would be perfectly fine, versus stand at the front of the classroom with a camera filming the other students in the class. So those are the dueling narratives that have characterized this fight at the Tennessee school. And we'll just wrap it with this, as Tennessee relented, given the concerns and given the very, very viable and righteous and understandable concerns being raised by the parents, they actually ended up saying, no, parents, we want you to be involved. Other school districts were watching very closely, because I can tell you, I teach college at night, as you know, there are many college students that do not want to be on camera for a variety of reasons. So balancing the equities is going to continue to evolve as we continue virtually, at least for the indefinite future in some jurisdictions. But anyway, that is to be revisited, because parents have a vested interest in learning what their children are being taught. and schools should too. And this case just shows that compromised positions are available. So that's the silver lining. I'm gonna save, we'll save the rest for another time, but that's the silver lining bow I'll tie on this story on this show. Okay, we have plenty for you after the break, so stay with us. Lots to talk about. Hope you're staying cool and safe and healthy, and we will continue in just a minute with more of Live with Dr. Wendy. You are listening to Live with Dr. Wendy. Thank you for hanging with us. We are going to move from education to the election. That's right, from learning to voting. We tend to forget because we've been so distracted by the heat and the virus and the fires and the air quality and back to school and back to work and everything else that has characterized 2020 and made it quite the unique year thus far, that we have an election coming up in November. So amidst all of this, we have to start thinking about what it's going to look like for us to be able to vote. Now, issue-wise, earlier this summer, if you were to ask people what they thought the two issues were going to be, they would have said, oh, that's easy, violence and the virus. Well, a lot's happened since then. The plot has thickened. There are a number of important issues to contend with. But one of them that we're going to discuss right now is how do we vote? Thankfully, Larry, I understand we have a special guest tonight to help us understand our options. This, by the way, is someone I am used to socializing with in TV newsrooms before we go on the air. So it is actually a privilege to have him on our own show. Larry, who do we have?
Yes, Wendy, today I'd like to introduce to you and our listening audience, Michael Vu, Registrar at the San Diego County Registrar of Voters. Michael's responsible for elections administration of the third largest election jurisdiction in California and the 8th largest election jurisdiction in the entire country. We have a registered voter population of around 1.56 million people right here in San Diego County. And Mr. Vu previously served as Executive Director of the Board of Elections in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and Elections Manager for Salt Lake County, Utah. He has testified before the United States House Administration Committee and the United States Election Assistance Commission, and he currently serves as a member of the Council of State Governments Overseas Voting Initiative Policy Working Group. Welcome to the show, Michael. Michael, I wanted to ask this question, and I think probably the listening audience is aware of this, but it's true that for this election, it is an all mail-in ballot election. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, so interesting, Michael. This has got to be a year for you like none other in terms of all of the different things that we are changing. But I have to ask you about one thing I heard that I just find fascinating. Is it true we will have polling places open for 4 days starting on Halloween? Now, we are hoping that super polls don't become a breeding ground for super spreaders. And Larry and I were talking earlier about, you know, this would be an option, an idea to come in costume. I'm sure there's no bans on that, but I can only imagine the viral videos that we will begin to see as people show up to vote on Halloween. I know Larry has quite a costume going. Maybe he'll share that with us later. But you talked about the polling places that are going to be open. Do you, and I know that, you know, there's lots of different ways to vote. Do you anticipate a larger group of people feeling comfortable under the circumstances coming to the polling place anyway. I know people are super patriotic and they want to do their civic duty. Sometimes you see them standing in line around the building, ordering pizza back in the day before we had these social distance restrictions. Do you anticipate a smaller amount of people actually venturing out to the polls?
So, Michael, there's some people that don't feel comfortable dropping their mail-in ballots into the U.S. postal system. Will they be able to go to some of these polling places and drop off their mail-in ballot right there in a secure pouch or cabinet, or even go to the registrar of voters office there in Kearny Mesa and drop off their mail-in ballot if they don't want to mail it in?
This is great information, Michael, and this is exactly what our listeners needed. Real quick shout out, we're almost out of time, but a website where people can find out more information about all of this? Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. And please join us next week for more Live with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. Have a great week. God bless you.